They say you don't really own the land, you're just borrowing it from time. But that never sat right with me. The first day I stepped onto that lot, boots crunching pine needles, I felt like I belonged to that patch of earth as much as it belonged to me. My house wasn't much, just a single story tucked behind a wind-whispering stand of pines, but the lake out back, that's what sealed it. Crescent-shaped wildflowers and reeds hemming its edge, deep and still, it never made the agent's brochure, which felt criminal to me. I pored over deeds and ancient plat maps, found half that shoreline drawn right through my lot. For an old environmental engineer like me, that wasn't just a feature, it was fate. Not in the dreamy sense. I mean, the lake lived. It pulsed with fish, flashed with frogs after dusk, sometimes even sighed in the morning fog. And for 5 years after losing my wife, I found peace there, sitting on the dock with my coffee, her ashes scattered under the willow where the dragonflies gathered every June. They called the place Meadow Hills. Though lakeside was a stretch, only 5 of us backed up to the water. The rest sat in tidy crescents with their HOA-approved flags and mailboxes, the works. Never hated HOAs, honestly. Rules are rules. But Meadow Hills Board, well, they didn't see a line between protecting value and grabbing control, and pretty soon that line was washed out completely. It started small, like it always does: letters about my wildflowers, warnings about my compost bin, the kind of stuff you hang on your fridge just to annoy your kids. I shrugged it off, but then came the morning I stepped out onto my dock and saw that rainbow sheen slithering along the water. Not oil worse. The sour stink of rotting concrete, a film clinging to the reeds, my gut twisted. I dipped a jar under the surface, watched yellow-gray sludge swirl, and right away knew this was no algae bloom. I circled the lake that morning, checking shorelines, empty yards save for one down the way. Fresh tire tracks raked into the mud. Not car tires heavier. I'd seen them before construction gear, maybe even a flatbed. The HOA had started some beautification project up front, flyers bragging about gazebos and stone pathways. And now here was a piece of tile broken and drifting in the water next morning. That night I watched from my dark window, and sure enough, trucks pulled up behind the Greenbelt men in neon vests, no company logos. They started dumping loads straight into the ravine that fed the lake. My hands shook, not with fear, but pure fury. Waited, snapped photos, video GPS stamp. Next morning, I walked into the HOA office, nerves humming like live wire. The manager, Karen Holt, wore the kind of smile you see in warning label illustrations. I laid out the evidence, even the EPA printouts about dumping regulations. She didn't even blink. "Are you accusing the HOA of criminal activity?" she said, all icy. I told her what I saw. She threatened legal recourse. I walked out of there with the kind of calm I hadn't felt since my wife died. They thought I'd back down. They didn't know who I was. I'd fought polluters bigger than them. I whispered to the pines, "You dumped in the wrong lake." Next morning, the stench hit me before I even set foot on the dock, sharp chemical wrong. Greasy scum hugged the shore. Dead fish 3, one a bass belly up. I gathered up broken tiles, insulation, rusted nails, filled an old bucket. That afternoon, I sent the HOA board an email, photos attached, signed off as retired environmental engineer. The reply: a cease and desist letter from some law firm warning of lawsuits if I continued to incite unrest. You ever get threatened for trying to keep a lake alive? Yeah, that happened. But I had friends. Called up Maria Collins, old consulting buddy, now working for the State Environmental Protection Commission. Sent her everything. She said, "You'll need more. Find a waterway connection, public health risk." I rented a drone, programmed a patrol route behind the tree line. The feed caught trucks dumping at 3 a.m., got faces, plates, everything. Submitted an anonymous tip. HOA pushed back newsletters about disinformation campaigns. Neighbors started avoiding me. Except one whispered thank you as she watered her roses. Then the worst mother duck, the one I'd watched raise hatchlings, jerks, flaps, collapses right there with her ducklings scattered. I waded in, heart-hammering, pulled her out. Dropped her off at the state wildlife lab. You think it's chemicals, the tech asked. I know it is, I said. That night Maria called, her voice shaking. Tom, your drone footage contractor's license is suspended. Governor's office wants to see this. Suddenly the stakes were way higher. HOA didn't just ignore me, they doubled down. Another letter now about unauthorized surveillance. Threats of daily fines, liens. That day I got the necropsy-backed duck diet of neurological damage, petroleum compound, cement, lime. I forwarded it to Maria, and that's when she said the governor wants to visit. Off the record. Next thing you know, 2 board members, Greg in his insurance khakis and Celeste community liaison, show up on my porch with a fruit basket. Let's keep things neighborly, Tom. Yeah, sure. I asked if they meant the page where their trucks dumped cement into the lake. Faces went gray. I mentioned the governor. They backed off. Retaliation started. Small mailbox, knocked over petty complaints about my garden tools. I kept my head down, waited. Then the governor himself showed up with Maria, an EPA official, and a state DA. We walked the property. I showed him the dead duck, the chute dumping into the runoff, the drone footage. He knelt by the water, dipped his fingers in, turned to me and said, "Reminds me of Pine Hollow 1993. His tone said he remembered everything. The days after that were chaos. The HOA called a closed-door meeting. Karen Holt vanished. Then on the neighborhood forum, an anonymous tip HOA used reserve funds to pay an unlicensed contractor. Karen signed off. Her son owned the company. Comments exploded. Next morning, Channel 4 vans in the street. County enforcement and DA in the HOA office with subpoenas. That's when neighbors came around, thank yous, apologies, stories of their own. One woman cried, telling me how Karen fined them $500 for a wheelchair ramp. People started organizing. Save the Lake signs popped up, kids drawing posters. The governor's office announced a state investigation. The trucks stopped coming, and the silence over the water finally sounded clean. But the lake still suffered. One morning the water glowed sickly green. Dead fish everywhere. Neighbors' kids had rashes, dogs sick, gardens dying. EPA teams deployed buoys, took samples, confirmed system-wide contamination, cement, benzene, nitrogen. They found a dying deer too late to save. At the emergency meeting, Greg tried to talk, but the crowd roared back photos, tears, accusations. David, the quiet guy from Lot 8, held up a photo of his grandson's arms. Rashes everywhere. I took the mic, told them what I'd done, what I knew, held up a bag of sludge, said, "This is what our HOA did." The room broke into applause. Not for me, for the truth. That night Maria called. It's not just your HOA. Same shell company, same playbook, at least 5 other neighborhoods. Your evidence started a state racketeering case. I felt a chill. This was bigger than any of us thought. Then Maria warned me, unmarked SUV spotted near my house. They were watching, trying to scare me off. She sent a liaison, a former ranger named Mara Sanderson. Together we found a buoy had been sabotaged, screwdriver marks, another attempt to erase evidence. Then little by little, hope. Ducklings returned, a frog croaked at the edge of the reeds. Karen resigned, her son tried to run, but both were indicted. Embezzlement, dumping, fraud. The lake was officially declared a recovery zone. EPA drained polluted silt volunteers, replanted rushes and lilies. Even Greg showed up with an apology and a rake. The new HOA was just neighbors, potlucks, lemonade stands, fences coming down. Ethan, David's grandson, became the junior wildlife ambassador, tracking frog populations, making me prouder than any award. When the state sent me a certificate for environmental stewardship, I tucked it in my notebook with the drone photos and test results because it's never about the awards. On the dock, one quiet morning, I finally saw the water clearing, fish darting, turtles surfacing, and a new cluster of frog spawn floating like glass beads. The air smelled like rain and pine, not chemicals. For the first time in forever, I felt peace. And the story kept going. Other communities called asking for advice. I told them, you don't have to be loud, just steady. Even a whisper can change the current if it never stops. Now, if you made it this far, I gotta ask, who was right? Who was wrong? When is enough enough? What would you do if it was your lake, your home, your legacy on the line? Drop your take in the comments, share your stories, and let's talk about what real justice means, because sometimes the only thing that stands between destruction and recovery is just one stubborn neighbor who refuses to shut up.